All right, guys, good morning. My name is Richard, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Iris and Sadie, who are the undergraduate students who helped me with this project. They did a really good job producing very high quality data and analyzing it very competently. So yeah, thank you very much for your help. It's very much appreciated. So without further ado, they will now present the findings, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm Sadie and this is Iris, and we're going to be speaking to you about our project on how to conduct corpus-based research on spoken language. Just a quick introduction first. Our project was almost split into two halves. So in the first half, we were transcribing audio files, which were then added to a collection of audio files, or these transcripts of audio files, which is known as a corpus. And this is a resource that was obviously very useful for our own research, but can also be used by other people going forward. And then we use this spoken corpus for linguistic research into the changing use of very and really. A bit first about the corpus that the transcriptions were added to. It's currently at over 130,000 word tokens across 81 different files. This corpus was started by Dr. Richard Zimmerman, and it's going to keep being added to over the years by lots of different students. We had to follow strict and comprehensive guidelines, so all the transcripts are really consistent, which makes it a really useful resource. They all also come with you can hear the audio files. So if you're to search a word, then you can listen to the sentence that it's in. So it's also useful for phonological research. You also get a rich metadata with each file, which means you're provided with information such as the age, region, ethnicity, and lots of other variables of that speaker and of that speech situation, which makes it really useful for sociolinguistic research.
Good morning. So my name is Iris, and I'm going to continue to introduce you our transcribing process. So basically, the goal for each of us is to produce two transcripts of about 5 minutes and 20 minutes long. So basically, the first thing we did is to go to YouTube or other public resources websites and to download the sound files that we wanted to transcribe. And then we put our sound files into this software called Audacity. So Audacity is a digital audio editor and recording application software. So where sound files could be edited or cut into sound clips. So basically, we put our sound files into the software and started to transcribe our thing. There's a screenshot of the Audacity program. There's also another thing that is really important during our transcribing process, which is this transcription manual. So you can also find it on our corpus website. So this transcription manual is really important because it regulates all the things about our transcripts. For example, the punctuations, the spellings, the format of our transcript, etc. So all our transcripts follow this transcription manual. By doing that, we can make sure that all the transcripts in our corpus would be standardized as well as in good manner. During the process, we also contributed to the transcription manual by finding out new problems that needed to be regulated. So this is basically how our transcripts look. You can see we've got timestamps, as well as you can see every sentence here, they're in good format. We also went over all our transcripts and corrected our mistakes to make sure these transcripts are perfect enough. So after we produced our transcripts, we put the transcripts as well as the audio files into our corpus and to make sure they could be used by our corpus users. So now I would like to do a little demonstration here to show you how our corpus works. So could any of you think of any word that you want to search for in our corpus? Any word would be fine. Bird. What? Bird. Bird? Okay. So basically you put bird in the search column. And you can see we've got only one hit. We can play.
But I have Flappy Bird because I think it's cool that I have it even though it's gone. Heads Up, which is great for babysitting.
So this is how our corpus works. You can hear the audio and also the text. Also, we've got different information concerning the transcriber, the file name, also the dialect or the year of birth, etc. So this is our first part about the transcribing process. And the second part is about using the corpus for linguistic research. So during our transcribing process, we found one thing that is really interesting and that we want to focus at, which is the variation between intensifiers, very and really. So before looking at this topic, we first need to know what is an intensifier. Basically, an intensifier is an adverb which strengthens another word. It measures the scale or degree of another word. It could be really large or really small, depends. And also, oftentimes, an intensifier does not have its own real meaning, so it could be oftentimes removed from a sentence. And we also got two examples displayed here to let you get the idea of what an intensifier is. The first one is, so yes, I had a very good idea. And the second was, we told a really good story, you know? So after we decide to look at this specific topic on the variation between intensifier, really, and very, we searched for all the instances of very and really in the corpus, just like what we did for the word bird. So we downloaded all the instances into an Excel spreadsheet as our data collection. In total, we've got 208 hits for very and 455 hits for really. However, this is not the end of our data collection process, because you can see in figure 3, this is our Excel sheet with false hits highlighted in yellow. We have to remove some of the hits from our spreadsheet because not all reallys or varies in our spreadsheet, they function as intensifiers. So some of them do not function as intensifier. So we should remove them out of our Excel spreadsheet. We also have two typical false hits here. So for the intensifier very, the typical false hit would be very plus a noun, which as shown in example 3, these are things that are sort of at the very boundary of life. And for the intensifier really, the typical false hit would be really plus a verb. So it'll be, I really like root beer. So after we removed all the false hits from our Excel spreadsheets, we got a total final data set of 359 hits.
So now moving on to our research questions and what we found. We were mostly looking into, is there a change going on from very to really? And did the intensifier really emerge from youth registers? We wanted to focus on youth registers because a lot of literature has found that young people are often more innovative with their speak and therefore they often lead change. This is a previous study done by Vito Tagliamon, and it just shows the history of intensifiers. So as you can see, in the 13th century, you would have well good, and then going forward, we'd have right good, very good, and most recently, the introduction of really good. You can see that very and really are currently coexisting, and based on the previous instances of new intensifiers, we can guess or kind of hypothesize that really will overtake very. We can also hypothesize that really will be overtaken by a new intensifier in the future. This is our own findings. We produced this graph using R, and as you can see, there's a clear increase. So this is showing the effect of age on the realization of the intensifier. And we ran a logistic regression model, and it is a statistically significant likelihood that really will be used more by younger speakers. Each point on this graph represents a text file, which is a different speech situation, and the size of it is proportional to the number of examples within. That's the number of hits of very or really. You can see these two dashed lines either side, and we have a 95% confidence that if you were to repeat this study, the line of best fit would fall within those lines. We can also project this line forward, and it will hit the 99% mark around the year 2070. So this means that people born from 2070 onwards will use really over very. This change is then complete. However, we do also have to think about the false hits that were taken out, and we might have instances such as the very fact that are still in existence and circulation.
So to test our second hypothesis, which is, did really emerge from youth registers? we first need to touch a little bit on the background of the whole theory. So there's a common explanation for the renewal of intensifiers, which is that it oftentimes originates from youth registers. So if you trace back the history, we've got plenty of intensifiers which emerged from youth registers, as we have 3 examples here. In the 19th century, people say it's bloody good, and in the 1990s, people say it's well good, and in 2010s, it became that's very exciting. So if this kind of theory is true, then people who use a lot of colloquialism should also use more really's versus very. So we want to first find out those people in our corpus who use a lot of colloquialisms, and then we want to find out if they use more really's versus very. So we looked for the frequency of non-standard colloquialism like so and kind of. We follow the same process as we did earlier. We searched for all instances and downloaded the results in an Excel spreadsheet and get the data. So we also have 3 examples here, and I'm like, yeah, I should call them. So everybody's got a website. And lastly, sorry if the fan's kind of loud. We collected the data of these 3 colloquialisms and put them in the software R and got our result here. So figure 6 shows the relationship between the relative frequency of colloquialisms versus the proportion of really versus very among female and male speakers. We got 20 dots here. You can see the dots in blue shows male speakers. The dots in red shows female speakers. We've got a total of 11 male speakers and 9 female speakers. So the x-axis shows the relative frequency of colloquialisms per 10,000 words, and the y-axis shows the proportion of really versus very. What we can conclude from here is that there's a relatively strong relationship between the relative frequency of colloquialisms and the proportion of really in female speakers. So we conclude that if a female speaker, she uses more colloquialisms in her speech, then it is more likely that she would also use more really's in her speech. However, we did not find this similar relationship in male speakers, so we could not conclude the same relationship for male speakers. And besides that, we also have an interesting finding, which is rather weird dot here. You can see on the left side. So this is male speaker, and you can see this male speaker, he uses very few colloquialisms because on the x-axis is on the left. And however, this male speaker, his use of proportion of really is extremely high. So this is opposite to our hypothesis. So we try to figure out why did this happen. So the possible explanation that we came up is that probably for this male speaker, so really is not a newly emerging intensifier, but for him, really is rather neutral and unmarked. So you can see he used few colloquialisms, but a really high proportion of really. So there's no association between the relative frequency of colloquialisms and the proportion of really for this male speaker. So in a nutshell, for hypothesis 2, there's limited evidence, and the interesting we find is that the effect of frequency of colloquialisms on really was only detected for females, not males. So in order to explain this thing, we also came up with an explanation, which is that sometimes women could be more slang and colloquial compared with male speakers. So we retrieved a typical example from our corpus. So you could hear from this female speaker, she uses a lot of colloquialisms, typically kind of and like, and
Like kind of in this guilty pleasure sense, obviously, where it's like you're watching them and you're supposed to like hate these women for being what, like superficial or conceited or catty or like always focused on drama.
So you can see this is a very typical example of the female speaker being colloquial and slang. And we also looked up for some literature, and there's one study focusing on the upper class aging women. And here's one quote that we found from the literature, which is, the analysis of stylistic composition of bureaucrats vocabulary showed that the heroine speech is characterized by colloquial and slang style. She widely uses elliptical structures like colloquialisms, which is a characteristic feature of the upper class people's speech. However, more studies need to be completed in order to test this hypothesis for sure.
So just to conclude on all of our findings, in this project we created professional transcripts following the guidelines and then analysed variation between very and really. We added around 10,000 words to the corpus and did find that really is in the process of replacing very, and there is also limited evidence that really is associated with use registers, specifically with women. There are still some limitations and open questions. Obviously, this corpus is still small, and whilst it is growing, we do have to be cautious with our findings from a limited amount of data. This was particularly problematic for hypothesis 2, where we only had 20 speakers in kind of our youth register age group. And also in hypothesis 1, the area around 1910s, 20s and 30s was particularly sparse. So we kind of need more older and young speakers to improve these results. There were also potential confounding factors that weren't taken into account. For example, the education of the speaker and the speech situation that they were in might change the use of very versus really. So we would also have to look into this. Overall, spoken corpus data is essential for quantitative analysis of linguistic changes and register associations, and we hope we have shown this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. What does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go for it.
You guys were using American English, right? So I was thinking, sort of like with the diversity of the ways that English is spoken, was that difficult? Because like with certain countries, they might not use really or very as much.
I mean, obviously, all of the data was from the American corpus, and we did find there was a lot of use of really and very. We kind of checked in the corpus that there was enough data to find useful findings. I guess with terms of the dialect across America, that's why we kind of had that information. If you wanted to compare the way it's used in different dialects, that is something you could do with this corpus to kind of improve it.
Okay, so it's like representative of American English,
yeah,
rather than global.
Yeah, it's only American English within that corpus.
This is fascinating, really. Congrats. Well, I'm not, of course, a specialist in this subject, but I'm just a narrow-minded economist. So I'm really in my comfort zone, seeing your comparisons, your projections, and I was just wondering, maybe if you are thinking in creating some comparative basis, I really would like to suggest to think of something like a cultural use of the language. Communicates different intensities from different cultures.
Yeah,
it's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting to look into.
I wondered whether, I loved your chart that showed the changing intensifiers over time. I'm an archaeologist, so it felt very archaeological to see. And there's people do that with artifacts to show the changing tendencies towards different types of artifacts in time. So it feels really familiar. But do you have any sense of what will replace really? You can see that really is going to peak in 2070. But have you any, are we all going to be saying, I'm the well-good generation. So what is there any sense of what might replace that in any way? Or is that too far into the future to know?
Well, I'm not sure we can predict that so far. There was obviously an example of bear coming into use, particularly among young speakers, but whether that will spread and catch on is up for debate. So it could be something like that, or as we've still got multiple choices of intensifiers that are in frequent circulation, perhaps there's not necessarily a need for an innovative form yet, and maybe when very becomes less use, that will be when really another intensifier starts coming into play as well.
It's so interesting as well, isn't it? Like at this point now, you're also able to capture the data in a gendered way, and I wonder if, like, you know, the understanding of it in the past, it's pretty homogenizing, but there may have been gender differences in it, and there probably were gender differences, but, you know, potentially, like, you know, Old English, women's voices in Old English probably weren't captured in the same way in text and so on, and so you know, potentially there might be like almost like a kind of bifurcation of different intensifiers based on gender language or something like that. It's so exciting. It's really interesting. Oh, well, that was really tremendous. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.